from your local attorneys. So this morning, what we're going to talk about is a program overview of the Emergency Assistance to Non-Public Schools, or EANS program. And then we'll go into a live application overview. And then we'll have a question and answer session at the end to answer as many of your questions as possible. We do have a program website that is your one-stop shop for everything about this EANS program. And the link is on the screen, or you can go to TEA's webpage, go to the home page, and then select Finance and Grants, and then Grants, and then the program name, Emergency Assistance to Non-Public Schools Grant Program. Either one will get you to the website, and everything, any updates on this program, any timeline changes, any guidance documents, everything for this program will be posted on that one web page so that you can find all the information in one location. So the EANS program was authorized under CRRSA, which is the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act. It was signed on December 27th of 2020. And EANS provides funding for services to non-public schools who are suffering from the impact of COVID-19. So the allowable uses of this EANS funding include those costs associated with safely reopening schools, continuing instruction, addressing learning loss, supporting educational technology, and includes reimbursements for certain types of coronavirus-related costs. So the funds may be used for pre-award costs dating back to March 13th, 2020, when the national emergency was declared for COVID-19, and it goes through the end of September of 2023. So the EANS program provides assistance and services only. There is no funding available to the private nonprofit schools who are eligible for this program. The award goes to the Office of the Governor, and the federal statute says that the state education agency, or us here at TEA, are to administer the program statewide. There are no district responsibilities in this program, so you will receive service directly from the state level. We will be selecting a contractor to implement the program activities. They will provide the eligible reimbursements to the participating private schools, and they will also provide either the direct assistance and services themselves, or they may use a third-party contractor to provide some of the services to the private schools that participate in the program. And the good news is that we already know a second round of EANS has been authorized under the American Recovery Plan Act. So what we're talking about today in the application we're looking at today is basically EANS 1 under the CRRSA statute, but we expect very soon there will be another application process that'll be very similar, where we will be putting out the services under the EANS 2 program under the American Recovery Plan. So an eligible non-public school who apply for EANS services will not be considered a recipient of federal assistance. This is very important because you are eligible for reimbursements for certain activities under the EANS program, but that reimbursement under EANS is being considered as a service, and it does not change the determination that you will not be considered a recipient of federal financial assistance at the federal level. As I said earlier, the governor is the recipient of the award, and the statute requires public agency to be in control of and administer the funds, which includes keeping the title to materials, equipment, property purchased with the funds. So what they did with the EANS program is kind of develop a new program, a new way of providing services with federal funding to private schools. They've taken the school district out of the picture, so the school district is no longer a middleman, and you're going to receive services directly from the state, but with the requirement that a public agency must control the funds. That keeps you at the private school from being considered a recipient of the federal financial assistance, which keeps you from having to comply with a lot of other federal regulations and rules. So who's actually eligible to apply for assistance under the EANS program? An eligible non-public school has to be an elementary or secondary school that is nonprofit. So it's a private nonprofit school. You must be accredited, licensed, or otherwise operate in accordance with Texas state law. You had to be in existence prior to March 13th of 2020, and that's the date that COVID-19 was declared a national emergency. And you did not and will not apply for and receive a loan under the Small Business Administration's Paycheck Protection Program. So this would be a new PPP loan that was made on or after December 27th of 2020. So under the statute, you may either receive a new PPP loan December 27th or after, or you may participate in the EANS program, but you cannot have duplication of benefits, so you cannot do both. Now, on that line, we do understand some of you may have applied for PPP in the newest round, not knowing what you would be eligible for services under EANS. And so when we get into the application, we will talk about it, but basically what we've done is said that by July 1, if you've applied for both, by July 1, you will have to notify us in writing which one you are going to accept, either PPP or EANS, and then you will drop out of the one that you do not choose. So the timeline for the EANS program has some really important statutory dates. So Texas received the award for the EANS funding on February 26th. By federal statute, we were given 30 days to release an application to the eligible private schools. So that application was released on March 26th. USDE recommended allowing only 30 days for private schools to complete and submit the application. But since you may not and are probably not accustomed to our application processes and our grant processes, we decided to give you 60 days. And so the application is due on May 28th of 2021. There is also another statutory requirement that only allows us to have 30 days from the date we receive your application to review and either approve or deny the services requested in that application. So the last date we would be approving applications is June 26th, but those applications must be actually reviewed, excuse me. Those applications must be reviewed on a rolling basis as they're received. And some of you were on the ball, and so we actually had an application submitted less than 2 hours after the application went live on March 26th. So we will start reviewing applications basically next week, and you will receive a notification that your application has been either approved with modification, or denied. And I'll tell you up front, it's not going to be a denial unless everything requested in the application would be unallowable. That's the only way you would get a denied application. If everything is allowable in your application, you will get a full approval of the services requested. If you have something that's not allowable, we will modify the application to remove the unallowable activities or services, and you would get a modified approval of services requested. It's important to note that you will not get a dollar amount of service until after we receive all the applications after the application due date. So we will not determine the amount of service, the dollar amount of service that you will receive until July, because we can't do that until we see how many applications we receive and what is requested. So it's important to note that you can receive these services from the pre-award date of March 13th, 2020, all the way through June 30th of 2023. So you saw on a slide earlier that the funding period goes through September 30th of 23. But we have to end the services on June 30th, 23, so that we can ensure you receive all the services you request, and then we can do closeout with the contractor, and then we have to do closeout procedures here at the state level by September 30th. So you will actually be able to benefit from the EANS program from March 13th of 2020 all the way through June 30th of 2023. So there are some basic requirements in the program. One of them being that we at the state are required to prioritize funding for services to private nonprofit schools who serve low-income students and the private schools who are most impacted by COVID-19. So if you've looked at the application, you notice there's a couple of questions in the application where we are asking your total enrollment, and then we ask for the number of your students enrolled who are low income, and you have to tell us the data source for that low income data. There's another question in there that asks how you were impacted by COVID-19, and it has options like loss of tuition, decreased enrollment, various things. Those two questions are in the application to provide us the data so that we can do this required prioritization of services. This is one of the reasons that we can't tell you the amount of service you'll receive until after the application closes and all the applications are reviewed and approved. You also may not receive both EANS and the payroll protection plan after December 27th of 2020. Again, you have to select one or the other. You can't receive both. And all services received under the EANS program must be secular, neutral, and non-ideological. It's important to note that we cannot limit the amount of service you request in your application. That's why we have designed the application to collect information for items you would like to be reimbursed for that you've already paid for. A second chart in D2 for items that you want to be reimbursed now through the end of June of 2023. And then the third chart in D30, which is actual services or assistance that we would provide to you through our contractor through June of 2023. So we're not limiting what you request. You request whatever service you need. You have to provide a little description of it in the application, as you'll see later, and you put the estimated dollar amount of that service. So you can request any amount of service that you need as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we don't limit what you ask for. We do, however, limit services based on the total volume of applications we receive and the total amount of service requested, because of that prioritization that is in the federal statute, where we must prioritize services to those private schools who are serving the higher percentages of low-income students or who were most impacted by the pandemic. So again, we can reimburse you for certain activities that are allowable back to March 13th of 2020. But it's key to understand that there are certain allowable activities in the federal statute that cannot be reimbursed. So there is a list of activities we'll get to on the next slide, but then there are about 5 of those activities that, while they are allowable for you to receive that service, you cannot be reimbursed for those services if you've already conducted them. It's also important to note that your private school cannot receive duplicate benefit, or the really technical term, you can't double dip and receive ESSER 1 Equitable Services, PPP, and EANS for the same service. So you can have received service under ESSER 1 Equitable Service and receive additional services under EANS. So let me give you an example. Very simplified, but if you received 100 bottles of hand sanitizer as part of your ESSER 1 Equitable Services, you cannot receive benefit from EANS for those same 100 bottles of service. So you can't request reimbursement for those same 100 bottles of hand sanitizer. But you received 100 bottles of hand sanitizer under ESSER 1 Equitable Service, you can request an additional 200 bottles of hand sanitizer under EANS. It's allowable as long as it is additional service and not receiving double benefit for the same service. So what type of activities or assistance or services are allowable under the EANS program? In federal statute, they provide a list of allowable assistance and services the private schools can receive through this program. Allowable services include supplies to sanitize, disinfect, or clean your school facilities. It is important to note the supplies are allowable. Salary for your janitorial staff or an outside cleaning service to come in and clean and sanitize your facility is not allowable. It is only the supplies that are allowable. Personal protective equipment, or PPP, is allowable. Improving ventilation systems, including windows or portable air purification systems, are allowable. On that item, it is not allowable for anything that takes remodeling to install or remove from your building. So it must be portable, and it must not take any type of remodeling or construction to install or remove the item from your building. Other allowable activities: training and professional development for staff on sanitation, the use of PPE, minimizing the spread of infectious disease. Physical barriers to facilitate social distancing is also an allowable activity. Material, supplies, or equipment that are recommended by CDC for reopening and the operation of school facilities to effectively maintain health and safety is allowable. Expanding capacity for the administration of coronavirus testing to effectively monitor and suppress the virus, so coronavirus testing programs can be allowable, as is educational technology, which includes your hardware, software, connectivity. It could be assistive technology or adaptive equipment. Any technology or equipment that assists students, educators, and other staff with remote or hybrid learning situations. Redeveloping or developing instructional plans, including curriculum development for remote or hybrid learning, or curriculum development to address learning loss. Leasing site or space to ensure safe social distancing is allowable. Reasonable transportation costs can be allowable. That is related to the leasing of additional sites or space for social distancing. So it's not your normal transportation costs, but it would be additive transportation costs because you had to rent an additional location to spread the students out and provide better social distancing. That type of transportation cost would be allowable. And the last one is initiating or maintaining education and support services or assistance for remote or hybrid learning or to address learning loss. So these are all the allowable assistance or services that are listed in the federal statute as the types of allowable activities that you can receive under the EANS program. In the application, you've probably noticed that you have to tie all your requested services to one of these allowable activities. So that's the full list. There's 5 of those items that can only be provided by TEA or our contractor moving forward and cannot be reimbursed to the private school. So improvements to ventilation systems, including windows, cannot be reimbursed, but the portable air purification system may be reimbursed. None of your expenses that you may have received through a prior PPP loan before December 27th can be reimbursed. Staff training and professional development on sanitation, use of PPE and minimizing spread of COVID-19 cannot be reimbursed. Developing instructional plans, curriculum development for remote or hybrid learning or addressing learning loss cannot be reimbursed, as initiating and maintaining the education and support services for remote or hybrid learning or learning loss cannot be reimbursed. So those are activities, other than the PPP piece, those are activities that can be allowable service you can receive in the future under the EANS program, but we cannot reimburse you for those activities you may have already done in those categories. So there are some things that are very specific that cannot be provided. These are unallowable activities under the EANS program. The first one being that we cannot issue a sub-grant directly to a private school. So there are no sub-grants in the EANS program. Salary for any private school staff are not allowable. The cost of janitorial or cleaning services to clean your buildings are not allowable, but remember the actual supplies to clean the building can be allowable. It's just not the actual cleaning or the use of a contracted cleaning service that's not allowable. And then any assistance or service that's determined to not be reasonable, necessary, and allowable under the program. So there was a question that we received. One of the private schools, or a private school, was leasing tents for outdoor classrooms for improved social distancing. And the cost of these tents ranges, the lease cost of them range for anywhere from $3,000 to $90,000. And the question that was submitted to USDE is, could the $90,000 tent be deemed not reasonable and not be approved? And yes, that could be determined as not reasonable. So everything you request, the activity has to be allowable by the federal statute, but then the price has to meet a federal regulation that we deal with all the time about being reasonable and necessary. So the cost of the activity does have to be reasonable. Now, I do understand some of these activities, you're putting an estimated cost in the application, because since you're limited to a 60-day time frame to submit your application, maybe you couldn't get an actual informal bid on a cost, or you couldn't get price quotes for one of the activities, so you just had to estimate the cost. If the cost you estimated is deemed to be not reasonable, we may reduce that cost down. It doesn't mean we would automatically not allow the activity, because we do understand that some of these things you're having to estimate the cost. And so we'll work through those issues. So at this point, we're going to go to the application, and we're going to go through the application questions, talk about the application, how you would fill it out, and then we'll come back and I'll answer a lot of the questions that you have submitted in the Q&A feature. So before we go to the application, just a reminder, if you will put your questions in the Q&A feature. Here in Zoom, since we are in webinar mode because of the size of the training, you have a button that says Q&A. And when you click on that button, you'll go into a question and answer feature where you can submit your questions to us. And I'll go through and answer as many of those as I have time to after we go through the application. So I need to stop showing you the slides for a minute. And hopefully you are now seeing the application. So Matt.
Yes, it's on the contact info slide or the screen.
Perfect. When you go to open the application, you are going to see an opening page that goes through a little bit of narrative. And then you're going to get to the actual application questions. And that's what you're seeing on screen, starting with the organization and contact information. And the first question is name of the eligible private nonprofit school or the consortium fiscal agent. So you can apply for this service as an individual private nonprofit school, or you can have a consortia or a group of schools that can apply together. And I'm going to give the example of a diocese. And there's other examples, and there's other groups or within your different types of organizations within some of your private schools. I'm just not familiar enough with them to know the names of them. So for the consortium, I'm just going to use the Diocese as an example. So the Diocese of Austin, because I know those people and they won't get mad at me for using them as an example. The Diocese of Austin could decide that they're going to apply as the diocese. And they're going to submit one application for all the private schools or a group of private schools within the diocese. So then the Diocese of Austin would be the consortium fiscal agent who is submitting the application. Or they could decide that each individual private school can apply on their own. And in that case, your individual private school is the name of the applicant. So you're going to provide either the name of your school or the name of your consortium fiscal agent, and then give us basic contact information, mailing address, city, zip code, an email address of the authorized representative of the school, and then a phone number. And then there's a certification, and it says authorized school representative. So the authorized school representative for your private school is generally the principal, unless you have a hierarchy where there is also additional people above the principal who are authorized officials. So this is a federal program. So in federal programs, there are rules around authorized official, and that has to be someone who has been designated by the school organization to be able to legally bind the school into a contractual obligation. So you're not going into a contract with us with this application, but that's the definition in the federal world of an authorized official. So in talking with some of your officials, basically we've determined we will accept anyone from the private school principal to someone higher up in the organization. So you'll put their email address of the authorized official, phone number in case we need to call and talk to you. And then there's a certification statement here. And then you're going to have the type name of the authorized official, and you're going to sign the application. Enter the date you're signing the application, and then you'll click on the blue button on the bottom right that has an arrow pointing to the right to continue. it's going to make me go back and answer everything. Matt, is there an easy way I can turn off all the validations so I can go through this with them?
Yeah, we have to switch to preview in the system, not in the actual survey if you're going to just skip through it.
Will it let me just skip through? Or is it going to make me put
not on the actual survey link? You'll have to fill it out. We have to move to the preview.
It's going to make me enter gibberish here. See, the system is programmed to make you do this right. Okay, sorry about this. You can tell I didn't practice this. But what you can see is it doesn't let you mess up very much in the applications. It's going to make you submit everything. So after you enter the contact information, part A is it's asking you the question of the applicant entity. Are you a single eligible private school? If so, you check the first radial button. Or is this an application for a group of private schools, such as the Diocese? And then if so, you're going to complete, save, and attach this form. When you click on this link, it gives you a form that you have to attach to the application. And basically what that does is it gives us the contact information for all the individual schools who are in your consortium or within the diocese or your different organizational group. So we're going to apply as a single private school. Then there are some eligibility assurances that we have to collect. And so you have to tell us that you are nonprofit, you are accredited, licensed, or otherwise approved to operate within the state of Texas. You existed prior to March 13th of 2020. And you did not and will not apply for and receive a PPP loan after December 20th. You have to certify that none of the services or assistance you receive that you're going to enter in Part D of the application have already been supported by a PPP loan or other under Equitable Services under another federal grant. And then you have to check that all the services you're requesting will be secular, neutral, and non-ideological. So those are assurances that you just have to accept to continue through the application. So Part C is the low-income student data and the impact of COVID-19. This is the section that the data you put in the application will be used for us to look at the prioritization for services that's a requirement in the federal statute. So it's important that if you're applying as a consortia, you must complete Part C as an aggregate of all the member schools. Other important is that the low-income data you're submitting and your enrollment data must be from the 2019-2020 school year, and preferably before the pandemic hit on March 13th, 2020. So the reason is that you had to be in existence prior to March 13th of 2020 to be eligible. And so that is the enrollment data we want is from the 1920 school year. So the actual questions, you go into the enrollment and low income data. So 1A, total student enrollment for your private school in the 1920 school year, or remember if it's a consortium, it's an aggregate of all your private schools. Number or estimated number of students from low-income families that were enrolled in the school in 1920. So B is your low-income student count. And then C is the percentage. And so you have to do the math and divide 1B by 1A. I'm keeping it simple here. And so you would enter the total enrollment, number of low-income students, and then the percent of low-income students in your private school. So D is the data source. So you have to use one of the allowable data sources to determine this number that you're entering in 1B as the number of low-income students. So your allowable data sources are in question 1D, and you're going to select the data source. So you have the option of using free and reduced price lunch data. I realize many of you will not have that. You can use other scholarship or financial assistance data that has similar criteria to the free and reduced price lunch eligibility. You can use the E-rate data or other relevant data, such as data that the private school has provided to the state for other purposes for state or local programs. So if you participate in some other program and you provide low-income data to the state for some other program, you can use that same data. Or the fifth option is to use data from the number of students from low-income families based on the American Community Survey or the Small Area Income Poverty Estimate. So these are two surveys that some of your schools are definitely familiar with. You can use that data, or you have the option of using proportionality. So proportionality data is the number of students who are enrolled in your private school who reside in a Title I school attendance area, multiplied by the percentage of that public school attendance area that is low income. So as an example, if you have 10 students who live in a Title I campus attendance area, and the low income percentage for that public school attendance area is 50%, you take your 10 students who live in that area times their low income percentage of 50%, and you would count 5 of those 10 students as being low income students. It is important to note, if you're using proportionality, that you will likely have students who live in more than one Title I school attendance area, and you may have to do this calculation on multiple public school attendance areas. You do that calculation for each attendance area, you then add up the number of low-income students that from all your calculations. The proportionality data is going to take a little bit of additional information, but it may be one of the better sources for you to use to determine your low-income students, especially if you have difficulty with the other data sources. And we will be putting some additional information on the EANS program website about how you can get the proportionality data. There's actually reports you can go to on our website that will list the public schools and have their low income percentages on them, where we can direct you to some data to help you with the proportionality. So we'll be putting some resources on the website for Title I attendance area low income percentages in case you want to do this proportionality method. Question 2, Paycheck Protection Program. Did the school receive a loan guaranteed under PPP before December 2020? Yes or no? If you put yes, what was the total amount of that loan? And do you assure that any funds received under EANS program will be for services or assistance not already funded by that PPP loan? So it's all right to have a loan prior to December 27th of 2020, as long as you provide the assurance that you're not using duplication of benefits, so that you're not using any service from the funds under EANS for something that was already covered under that PPP loan. Question 3 is the other big question about the data we need for priority. So you're going to describe the impact of COVID-19 on your private school, and you can check multiple options here. And you have pre-printed options, then you have other. But we pre-printed the ones USDE basically said were acceptable. Loss of other income other than revenue, loss of other income revenue, which is other than tuition, loss of tuition revenue, decreased enrollment, lack of capacity to provide remote learning due to insufficient technology, data documenting the extent of learning loss attributable to the disruption of COVID-19, or other. If you mark other, you have to give us an explanation. And again, you can mark as many of these that apply to your private school, but this is the data that will be weighted to determine priority for greatest impact of the pandemic. Question 4A, did the school receive equitable services from your local school district under ESSER 1? Yes or no? We're going to say you did. And then 4B, do you assure that any funds received under EANS programs will be service assistance not already provided by the ESSER 1 equitable service? Again, this is just assuring that you're not duplicating benefit for the same service, same activity from 2 different federal programs. We'll try this again. I'm actually working in the office because I thought I would have the best internet to do this training, and I'm not always connecting. So there we go. So part D is the critical piece of the application. Well, it's all important. You have to fill it all out, but this is where you're going to actually request services and assistance under the EANS program. So there's 3 tables. You have to pay attention to the heading of the table to see what the difference is. So to be eligible for assistance or services, you have to request that assistance or service activity and enter a corresponding cost or dollar amount. And again, you can estimate the cost. If you have time, you can collect informal bids, you can get price quotes. If you don't have time to do that, you can just estimate what the service would cost. Again, I put in the notes here for you that staff and FTEs are unallowable for any of these activities. And we will review and approve the allowable assistance and services requested. We will delete anything unallowable or questionable as not being reasonable or allowable. There's not an amendment process. So in a 30-day window for us to review and approve your application request, there is not time for you to come back and forth and amend and resubmit and resubmit. So you need to submit everything that you're requesting in the original application, and anything that is unallowable or not deemed to be a reasonable cost will just be deleted from your application, and that's when you would get a modified approval. So D1 is request for reimbursement of previous expenses. So these are expenses that are in the allowable activities list that you incurred March 13th of 2020 through the date you submit the application. So this is request for reimbursement of previous allowable expenses. And so the activities that are listed in the left column are from the list in federal statute of what's allowable, but it's only the ones who are allowed for you to be reimbursed. And then the right-hand column, you have to put a dollar amount. So if you wanted supplies to sanitize, disinfect, and clean, you have to tell us what it is. Preferably an amount helps, but not required. You just have to describe the activity. So in the dollar amount, enter whole dollars. So don't put decimal points. So don't enter cents, and don't put commas. So just enter numbers, whole dollar amounts. Second category that's allowed for reimbursement is personal protective equipment, or PPE. You have portable air purification systems, which is the only piece of that one part of which is allowable for reimbursement. You'll remember in the allowable activities, there's a lot more in that allowable activity, but those pieces are not allowable for reimbursement other than the portable air purification system. So you can describe it and put a dollar amount. Physical barriers to facilitate social distancing. I've had some questions on this. This is like your plexiglass barriers that go around student desk. This is like plexiglass shields that are in front of the teacher, while the teacher's at the front of the classroom, like in front of a projector or projecting a laptop, and there is a plexiglass shield separating the teacher from the students. You know, there's various different things that can fit into this physical barrier for social distancing. I've had some questions about what all could be included here. You've got some flexibility. If we have a question about what you're actually submitting, we will call and talk to you, or we will zip you an email and ask for clarification on it. But there have been several questions submitted to me as to what type of barriers that this allowable activity actually includes. So any type of physical barrier that allows better social distancing can potentially be reimbursed here. Other material supplies, equipment recommended by CDC for reopening and operation of school facilities to effectively maintain health and safety. So you can describe the activity. And again, there's a lot of flexibility what you can put in here. So you have to describe it and enter your dollar amount. Expanding capacity to administer coronavirus testing and effectively monitor and suppress the virus. So this is your coronavirus testing program. Education technology, remember this is hardware, software, connectivity. Leasing sites or space to ensure social distancing. I've had questions about this item as well. This one is like if you need to lease the building next door to you so that you can have better social distancing, so you can spread out the students in the classrooms better. So you're actually leasing additional sites or leasing additional spaces to have better social distancing. One question is about leasing a larger space next door so that you can serve lunches and have better social distancing. That's the type of things that are included in this activity about leasing sites or space for social distancing. The reasonable transportation cost, again, this is related to having the additional sites. This is not your normal transportation. If you provide any type of normal transportation, this is additional transportation costs, either to transport students between additional sites, or if you do have a normal transportation, and you need to add additional routes so that you have fewer students in close contact with each other. This could be included here as well. So these activities are the activities that do allow for reimbursement. So D1 is reimbursement of past costs. And again, it's March 13th of 2020 through the day you submit the application to us. So basically March of 2020 through it can be May of this year. D2 is the exact same list of activities, but it is for future reimbursement. So things you're going to continue to have cost, but you're going to be incurring these costs after you submit the application to us through that June 30th of 2023 date. So it works exactly the same. It's the same activities. Put the dollar amounts in, everything functions exactly the same. So D1 is previous cost you want to be reimbursed that you've already paid. D2 is future costs that you would request reimbursement from the date after you submit the application through June 30th of 2023. And then D3 is the request for actual future assistance or service. So again, this will be activities that TEA or our selected vendor will provide directly or through third-party contracts to you, basically starting around August through, again, June 30th of 2023. So this has the same activities you've already seen in D1 and D2, but it also has 4 or 5 additional activities because you have some things that cannot be reimbursed. Everything that's in D1, D2 that can be reimbursed can also be provided outright. So you have the full list of activities here under D3. So you're going to see some of the same things: supplies to sanitize, PPE. Remember this one: improving ventilation systems, including windows and portable air purification. Remember, on D1 and D2 for reimbursement, the only piece of this that was allowable for reimbursement was the portable air purification system. But you could request the system for service for other types of activities that would improve ventilation systems, including windows. Now, USDE has clarified repairing windows can be allowed, but replacing windows, installing new windows is not allowed because that is not temporary. It is not portable. To remove that window from your building would require remodeling. So replacing, installing new windows into your building will not be allowable, but repairing old windows could be allowable. Training, professional development, physical barriers for social distancing, other materials, supplies, or equipment for CDC. You've seen a lot of these, again, because they can be reimbursed. But then you have the additional items where you can't. So you have the full list here because it may be items that can't be reimbursed. It all works the same way. Put it in the appropriate category. Whatever you type in here for the activity, you have to be able to document and tie it to that category. And you need to give us a short description, but give us enough that we can tie it. We can see the correlation between the activity you request and the category you're placing it in. We may move it to a different category if we think it fits a different category better to keep it allowable. But we have to be able to see that correlation to actually see that it's an allowable activity. So you're going to go through D3, all the services you're going to request that we provide to you, nothing that you're asking for reimbursement. Again, reimbursements on D1 and D2, but any service you're requesting. And you're going to put the general description of it and the dollar amount using whole dollars only with no symbols, no dollar signs, no commas. There's a note for you. TEA will randomly require reasonable documentation, especially for reimbursement items, such as paid invoices or receipts. We do have to monitor this program. We do have to ensure compliance. So throughout the year, if you're receiving reimbursement, do know that we will randomly be selecting some of the reimbursements that are being provided, and we'll be asking you to provide us the documentation where you received that item and you paid for it, and you're now being reimbursed for it through our program. So just know that there will be compliance monitoring, there will be some random validations, and any of you can be selected as part of those random validations. Okay, enter a valid number. Where did I not put a valid number? Okay, it's telling me I didn't enter something, so. Well, I'm not seeing why it's kicking back and not saving this. It may think that price is not reasonable, maybe. Matt, do you know why it's not accepting this? Well, sorry about that. I don't know why it's not accepting these numbers. Anyway, whenever you finish the application, it's going to automatically send you an email to that email address. Too much. Let me try that. Let me see if I went overboard on my laptop cost. That wasn't it. Oh well. Whenever you finish submitting the application, you actually hit submit, you will immediately get an email back so that you know you've submitted, and it has a copy of all your responses in your in the email. It tells you everything that you put there. I don't think it's going to allow me to submit it with zeros, but we're going to try just to show you how the rest of this works. All right, I don't know what it is. Sorry about that. Anyway. So the application, once you submit, whoever submits it, put whatever email address you enter on that certification will automatically get a response back from the system. Will tell you it's been submitted, and will also show you all your responses. So you know we got it, you know what's there. Should not be any reason for you to need to email us to ask if we received it, because you will get the email right there and it'll tell you that it was submitted and let you know that what you responded. So I'm going to go through some questions that you've submitted here in a minute, but if you think about additional questions, or as you're planning and preparing the application, you have additional questions, you can email your questions to us at the email address on the slide. It's eans@tea.texas.gov, and we will be putting an FAQ document together and posting it on that one-stop website page for you. So we'll be adding questions as we get them in, and you'll be able to go there and check for updates to questions and see what everybody else is asking at the same time. So you'll want to go ahead and submit your questions to that email address as well. So I'm going to go to some of your questions. Quite a few, just 125 questions in here. So we're going to see how much we can cover in the next half hour. So I'm going to start kind of at the top. Are you allowed to replace air conditioning and heating units with the EANS grant? Basically, no, because it would be considered construction and renovation. And remember, at the end of this grant period, at the end of the service period for EANS, those items of equipment have to be returned. And anything that requires any type of remodeling or renovation to remove the item is not allowable. If you received a PPP loan before December 27th, 2020, you're still eligible for the EANS program. Yes, you are. You just have to certify that you're not duplicating benefit between EANS and what you already paid with the PPP program. So how will the funds be allocated? Well, we have to wait till we get all the applications in and see how much service is requested. If we have enough money to cover everything requested, we can basically provide everything requested. If we don't, and honestly, we just don't have a way to know. I have no idea how many applications I'll get from private schools under this program, with it being a new type of program. But if we don't have enough money to cover all the requests, then we have to go through that prioritization process, and we have to fund the schools with higher percentages of low-income students at a higher rate than schools without low-income students, or with lower percentages of low-income students. And we use a rating scale on that question about what impact did you have from the pandemic. Because by federal law, we have to give priority to private schools with more low-income students that had the greatest impact from the pandemic. So we're going to use those two sections of the application. We have a rating scale that we will use from the data that's provided in those two questions to do the priority. And then we will do a calculation that determines how much service each school that applied will actually receive. But remember, we can't make those determinations until after all the applications are received and processed. So your applications are due by May 28th, and then we have 30 days to process anything that comes in on the last date. So it'll be early July before we actually can do the calculation and then notify you of how much, the amount of service that you'll be eligible for. Is furniture allowable? It might be. You're going to have to describe the furniture and tie the use of the furniture to the pandemic. If it's furniture, if it's needed for social distancing, like you need, like you have a lunchroom or cafeteria area and you need additional tables and chairs, or maybe additional tables, so that during the lunchtime the students can have better social distancing. That type of furniture may be allowable, probably can be allowable. It's all going to depend on what you describe and how you describe it, and that we can tie it to one of those allowable categories. Do you receive a specific list of allowable and unallowable services or items? The specific list is in the PowerPoint we just went over. It's also in the FAQ documents that are on the website. Once we go through your application, we will delete anything unallowable. And once we finish processing the application, you'll then have a list of what you submitted that was deemed allowable that you can receive service for. What's an example of services that qualify? Anything that's on that allowable list that we went through in the training, specifically an example of service in the allowable category of developing curriculum for the prevention of learning loss or to catch up on learning loss. You may need a consultant to help you work through that process to do the curriculum development related to learning loss and the services that you might provide to your students around learning loss. So if you need a consultant to come in, it may be that our contractor provides that service to you, or they can do a third-party contract with someone else to provide that service. That's one example. It can be any type of service that fits in any of those allowable uses. Am I understanding that the school district that we are under for the ESSER one is the one you will go through for EANS? No, that's a very big difference. ESSER one had equitable services through the school district whose boundaries you're located inside. So you went through equitable services you received equitable services through that school district for ESSER one. ESSER two, ESSER three do not provide equitable services. Instead, both the CRISA Act and the ARP Act both provide this EANS program. The EANS program provides the service from the state level down to the private school. Your local school district is not involved in the EANS program in any way. If a school has a PPP loan for salaries, can they still apply for other services? If your PPP loan is before December 7th of 2020, yes, you can still apply for other services under EANS. However, if your PPP loan for salary is after December 7th of 2020, no, you cannot apply for EANS. You can only do one or the other if that PPP loan was after December of 2020. Would additional staff and health services and or transportation be allowed? No, I'm sorry, no staff salary is allowed under EANS. Will a copy of the slides be distributed after the training? The slides will be posted on the website in a PDF format, and the recording of the training will be made available to you probably by the end of the week. It just takes us a few days to get the recording and to get it posted, but the slides themselves will be turned into a PDF document, put on the website, and then you'll get the recording. Is there any way for you to have an idea how much money you will receive if you're approved, at least a ballpark, so that you can consider budget on your application? Well, first off, you do not receive money, you only receive service. So we will in July calculate the dollar amount value of the services you'll receive, and we will provide that information to you. But remember, there is no grant program here, so we cannot issue grants to the private schools. So you don't really receive money, and remember, they're considering the reimbursements to be service, not receiving funds. What about additional substitutes needed for teachers who are out for COVID quarantine testing or vaccines? That's a good question. I need to send that one to USDE and ask whether they're going to consider that as salary or as substitute pay is different. So I'll have to submit that question and try to get an answer back on that. Can you give an example of improving ventilation without remodeling? The only thing we've heard USDE talk about is really some type of portable air purifiers or portable ventilation systems. Whether it's portable systems that mount literally in a window that can just simply be removed, or whether it's like portable ventilation or purification systems that are on wheels that plug in and just roll around one room to the next. That's the only thing we've heard anybody talk about related to ventilation systems that would not require some type of modeling to install or remove. Can the private school teachers be hired through the third-party vendor to tutor your students after school to close the learning gap? It's not salary, but I'm not 100% sure on this one yet. I think the answer is going to be yes, that your teachers can be hired through the vendor to provide tutoring and other services to the students. Not totally sure on that one yet, but I think the answer will be yes. I'm still waiting to get clarification from USDE on that. What is the date range of getting reimbursed for eligible cleaning supplies? Are those dates affected by the PNP receiving a PPP loan? As long as nothing you're asking for reimbursement under EANS was covered by your previous PPP loan, like cleaning supplies, the date of the reimbursement starts March 13th of 2020 and goes through the end of the grant period. Our transitional programs serving neurodiverse populations covered under this grant. I would need you to email me or contact me, and we'd need a conversation on that one. I just need more information. They may very well be allowable. I just need more information that's specifically what you're asking about. Will you have to submit invoices for future purchases when they occur? You'll only have to submit an invoice if you're selected for a validation of like a reimbursement request. And then basically what we're going to be asking for is just documentation that you received the item and that you've paid for it. So you received it, an invoice or a proof of payment, something very simple, but it's not going to be everything that you're asking for reimbursement. It's going to be a random selection. As you see on the screen, I have a very small staff for this program. There's I only have 2 staff plus me working this program generally. So it's going to be a random validation process scattered out over the full period. So do not think you're going to have to submit every single invoice that you ask reimbursement. It's not going to be like that. It'll just be a random, and it'll be like one item that you're being reimbursed for that we will pull and ask for the documentation. So not every time. Will final allocations be issued after the application deadline? Do you think allocations will be available before the end of June to allow for summer services? It is not likely that we will get services started before the end of June. We won't even have all the applications reviewed and approved until the end of June. Copy of the slides, yes, they'll post on the website in a day or within a day or two, probably tomorrow. But the slides will be available on the website. Can you email the presentation slides to the participants? I think we can. Matt, because we had them register, we can email out to the registration list, correct? And he's probably working on something else. I'm pretty sure we can email them out to the registration. If we can, we'll email them. If not, they will be on the website. Can schools affiliated with religious organizations apply? Yes, as long as you are a private nonprofit school and meet those 3 eligibility criteria, you can apply. Question about the governor's recent executive order that private entities receive governmental funding cannot request whether or not people have been vaccinated. Will EANS funding? I've had a couple of questions on this and I need to do some checking on it. I'm just not sure how the governor's executive order would interplay with the EANS program. So I'll have to check that and put an answer to that question on the website, or maybe even try to send it. That one we'll probably send out through the private school listserv we have, because I just don't know how the two programs are going to interplay, but we'll get an answer on that. Okay, our school received funds from our local county as a grant under the CARES Act. Are those reimbursed expenses treated the same as double dipping? Yes, if you received funding through your local county under CARES Act, it's most likely under the CRF funds. It would be the same thing. You can't double dip or have duplicate benefit on the same item between those funds and the EANS funds. You can add additional items under service through EANS, but it can't be for the same one. So that's like any other federal funds. You can't have duplicate benefit on the same item. If you had to hire extra employees to accommodate social distancing, splitting classroom size, extra custodial help, can TA cover the salary of that person? No, unfortunately, we cannot cover salary for any private school staff. If you do not have Title I students, does that make you ineligible for EANS? No. If you don't have low-income students, you'll have a lower priority, so you may get a lower amount of services, but you can still apply. It does not make you ineligible. You can still apply and still receive services. The new principal becomes the leader of the school over the summer, whose name should be on the application. If you know who, like if it's an existing staff member who's being promoted to principal, I would put that new principal's name on the application. But regardless, it needs to be someone who will be available for us to call or send email to if we have any questions about your application. So it's kind of going to depend on your situation, but it does need to be someone who can sign for the school and someone who will be available. Is the authorized official signature a digital signature? Actually, you can sign it with your finger on a tablet or with your mouse. It's a digital signature, but it's not like a Microsoft digital signature. It's not like some of the digital signatures that you may have access to. I mean, we did it the simplest way, where literally you can sign it with your mouse or with your finger on a phone or tablet, and that's acceptable as well. If a diocese applies as a consortium, some of the schools in the consortium may have received PPP loans. Would that create a conflict? They can't have a PPP loan after December 27th, 2020 and receive service under EANS. So if they have a PPP loan after December 27th of 2020, they can't be part of the consortium to receive service under EANS. So yeah, you would have a little bit of a conflict there. So you'd have to take those out. While this isn't federal assistance, are there still financial requirements required, such as following purchasing procedures if you buy items over X amount and need to get bids and such? And if so, will those be posted on the website? The private school is not a recipient of federal assistance, so you don't have to follow federal procurement rules. The only thing in the financial requirements that are applying to the private schools on this is that we will be doing the validation of reimbursement. So you will have to provide us some type of documentation for those reimbursements when you're randomly selected, if you're randomly selected, but you don't have to follow the federal procurement rules. Our contractor will have to follow all those rules, but they're going to be a public entity who's accustomed to following all the federal rules, but the private school does not follow those rules. What are the pros and cons of submitting an application as an individual school or as a diocese or group of schools? From my point of view, there's not any difference. It's totally up to you. We actually put that option in the application system to be flexible and to give the private schools, more flexibility and options after we had a meeting with some of the private school officials. So from our side, from processing it, it doesn't matter to us one or the other. It's simply what's best for the private school in your organization. The example of a diocese, if some schools are taking PPP round 2 but won't be receiving EANS, would you recommend schools apply separately instead of under a group, or can the group still apply for only the schools participating? You can still apply as a group and only include the schools who are eligible for EANS. It doesn't have to, like if you're a diocese, the diocese can apply, but you don't have to include all the schools within your diocese in the application. So you have 100 schools in your diocese, 25 of them are taking the new PPP, you could apply for the other 75. You don't have to include those 25 because those 25 are not eligible. So you have the flexibility in it. You can include as many or as few in a group application as you choose. Secular, non-ideological, and neutral, that is a requirement for private schools who have religious affiliations, that none of the federal services can be religiously affiliated service. So everything has to be secular, neutral, and non-ideological, meaning there is no religious content related to the service being provided with the federal program. What income level is considered low income? We need to get that and put it on the website. Free and reduced price lunch program has a chart, and it depends on the number of people in the family. So based on the family size, there's a different income level to qualify for free and reduced. So there's a chart, and we'll get that put on the website. Several questions again about defining low income levels. We'll put that chart up there because that's about the best thing I can give you. But all your other methods are just something that is a low income definition comparable to free and reduced price lunch. I understand that preschool children can be counted as long as the preschool is part of the overall school. Is there an age limit? Yes. Had a meeting with USDE yesterday, and they talked about this, and it goes back to aligning to state law. Public schools in Texas can start at age 3. So we have early childhood and pre-kindergarten at age 3 and 4. So in the private school, if you have preschool children as part of the elementary school that are age 3 and 4, they can be counted. But it has to be preschool that is part of an elementary school that serves other grade levels in the kindergarten and above. A straight private preschool that only serves 3 and 4 year olds would not be eligible. But if it's pre-kindergarten, 3 and 4, kinder and first grade, then they are eligible. What is E-rate data? E-rate is another federal program where based on low income status of neighborhoods that you can get reduced price and federal assistance for technology cabling. So it's just another federal program that has a definition of low income tied to it. In the data area of the application, choose only one data source. Yes, you choose one data source for your private school. However, you're counting the low-income students. If you're using proportionality, to use the district-wide numbers, or does it have to go to the individual school level? It must be the Title I school attendance area where your private school student lives. So that's why I said you may have students that live in multiple Title I attendance areas. You may have to do that calculation for multiple school attendance areas and then add the numbers together. So it is down to the individual school level. Our school is accredited pre-K-6 with licensed preschool infants through 3. When I'm calculating the numbers, can I count all students enrolled or only those in the accredited part? You can only count those age that are in preschool, 3-year-olds and above. So you cannot count infants, but you can count the pre-K 3 and 4-year-olds. Low income data, we do an annual income survey, but it's not one of the surveys listed number 5. I don't have it up in front of me again, but there's one of the options in there that's other data. If you'll email me, I'll tell you which one exactly you would put that into. I don't have that. I've already closed that out. I don't have it up in front of me. Sorry. Do the low-income students have to be tracked back to a Title I Part A served school for all data sources? No, the Title I school is only if you're using the proportionality method. So you're not having to track it back to a Title I school for the other. If you're using one of the other data sources, they can still be counted as low-income students and not be tracked to a Title I campus. If you use proportionality data, do you have to report all the data or just a final number? You're reporting just the final number of low-income students, but you would have to document your calculation of how you received that number because we may randomly validate the low-income counts as well. I really don't know some of these requirements, what we're going to have to randomly validate yet, because I don't know what USDE is going to require of us in some of these areas yet. There is compliance that we have to do. We will validate certain things depending on what USDE is looking at. But that's very easily, the count of low-income students could very easily be one of the things that we needed to collect data on. So you only report in the application your final number of low-income students and what the percentage calculates to be, but you do need to maintain that documentation and have it available in case we were to need it. Using proportionality, are there rounding rules? As an example, if you have 10 students from an area that's 35% Title I, does that count 3 or 4? You would calculate that as 3.5. If that is your only campus, you would round that 3.5 up to 4. But if you had 2 or 3 campuses, you would carry that decimal point and add the 3 together, and then your final number, anything 5 or above, you would round up. Okay, I believe you said no permanent construction was allowable, but just to clarify, we did construction to subdivide our library so that we could social distance appropriately. We also added sick and well side to the clinic. These are not allowable. No, anything that required remodeling or construction is not allowable because it's not considered portable or temporary. We hired additional personnel to facilitate social distancing and another nurse. These costs are not allowable. No, they're not, because we're not allowed to do any salary cost. No salary at the private schools can be allowable. Okay, what if the church that our school is associated with received a PPP loan, but they are a separate 501c3? Okay. If your school is associated with a church if you are all operating under the same 501c3 or 503c, the same nonprofit delegation, then you are one entity. If you are under separate nonprofit delegations, you are a separate entity. So in this question, I'm understanding that the church is a separate nonprofit than your school, even though you're associated with that church. As you are separate, them having a PPP does not impact your status for participating in EANS. What are examples of support services for remote learning to address learning loss? Oh, wow. There could be all types of services you would provide to students with remote learning to address learning loss. It could be extended year programs, extended day programs, tutoring programs, summer programs, all of which can be provided through remote learning. There's a lot of stuff there. I mean, real detailed examples are just not coming to mind, but you want to submit something, just justify it in the blank on the application, and we'll definitely look at it for you. We hired a company to electrostatically clean every night. This is not allowable. No, the cost of the cleaning is not allowable. Only the supplies can be allowable. Will items requested be ordered on our behalf like an equitable service program works, or will the school receive a check to reimburse what has been spent by us? That depends how you request it in the application. If you requested in section D1 or D2 for reimbursement, you would receive reimbursement, a check for what you've already expended. At the same time, you can request those services in section D3 of the application, and those items would be ordered and sent to you. I got to catch up on the questions. Give me just a second. Okay, my school applied for a second round of PPP. It's possible we may not get approval until after the 60-day deadline of applications for EANS. So do we miss out on the opportunity? You can go ahead and apply for EANS and PPP both. It's just you must tell us in writing by July 1 if you're taking PPP, so we can cancel your EANS request, or that you canceled PPP and you're taking EANS. So you may not know by the time you have to apply May 28th, but you do get about 30 days more than that. We just have to know by July 1 which one you're taking if you are applying for both. Can loss of other income revenue include financial needs-based scholarship income? Yes, you can include that. Can a third-party provider provide tutors, counselors, or other support personnel? Potentially, yes. Like public schools, we serve students with special needs through age 22. They are all in K through 12. Our students age 20 to 22 permitted for the count. As long as they're K through 12 and they meet the age criteria of special education, you can count them just like a public school would. Do the description fields have character or word limits? I'm sure they do. Matt, are you listening where you could answer that?
We did not limit any text, but remember, it's an application for review, so any unnecessary narrative will slow the review. Most fields, when you report expenditures, are numeric fields, so the other columns may limit you, but we didn't put any character limits.
Great, so you're not limited on character or words. Need to catch up a minute. What about hand sanitizer stands? Yes, you could include that. That would be supplies or you could potentially put that in the category of the one that talks about CDC standards for health and safety. It could probably go either one of those. What is an example of expanding capacity to administer testing? If you have a testing program and right now your program only allows 25 tests a week, you could use this program to expand that to up to 50 tests a week. Or if you don't have a testing program, you could use this to start a COVID testing program, things like that. If you had to buy desks to use instead of tables to social distance, would the desks be allowable costs? They can be allowable. You just have to justify them and explain why you're doing it and how you're using it for social distance. So the explanation is going to be key, but yes, it could potentially be allowable. If we got our desk shields through CARES Act, EANS dollars cannot reimburse that money. That is correct. If you've already gotten them through Equitable Services under the CARES Act ESSER program, you cannot be reimbursed through EANS. That would be duplication of benefit or double dipping. Do items reimbursed become property of the state? Potentially, yes. If you bought laptops and you asked them to be reimbursed through EANS, you do sign over ownership. They become property of the state and they will be removed from the private school at some point in the future, either at the end of the program or at the end of such time they have a use at the private school related to the program. So yes, they do become property of the state if you ask to be reimbursed for equipment. In an earlier meeting, the presenter said we could get personnel if we did so using a third party. Is this correct? I don't know what the earlier meeting was. Salary is not allowable under EANS. The only thing that is potentially allowable is like for a third party to provide tutors or provide staffing to provide a service. And I think in that instance that the third party could hire like your private school teachers to provide the tutoring, like on Saturday or after school hours, but no salary for any personnel of the private school would be allowable. If you purchase a tent because it's less expensive than renting it, where would that go? In the application, you would put that on the category about the wording is something around leasing additional space or some. I don't remember how it's worded, but it's one about leasing space where we talked about expanding your space or leasing additional sites. The tent would go the same place. We upgraded bandwidth to support video to remote students. Would that be covered? You generally can't be reimbursed for it, but it may be allowable through the vendor. I need to ask that one. That's a little bit different question than what's been discussed. So I'll need to ask USD that one. There was a question about purchase Chromebooks to have enough. If you ask to be reimbursed for them, would you have to give them up to your district? If you ask to be reimbursed through this program, they don't go to your district, they would go back to the state. So anything technology-wise, equipment-wise that you request reimbursement or for us to provide to you as service, at the end of the grant period or at such time it's no longer has a use to the private school related to this program, it does come back to the state. TEA maintains the title to that equipment and it does get returned. This question said, would you be handing them back in every year? that's to be determined. We'll just have to see how that would work. Some of the programs you do have to turn those laptops in, like if you have laptops, you have to turn those back into the district under equitable service each year and then get them checked back out. Depending how this system is set up. I haven't selected my vendor yet, who's going to provide the services. So I don't know if it's going to be a statewide vendor, regional vendors. So I can't really say how it would work about whether you would have to turn those things in every summer and then get them reissued. I don't know how that's going to work yet, but most definitely the state owns title and they do come back to the state at the end. Yeah, the question a while ago about buying the tent, you would put it under leasing site or space to ensure social distancing. Even though it says leasing, it would be kind of the same thing. But know that that tent would likely have to be returned as well. So in that category of leasing sites or space for social distance, what about leasing a storage unit to remove furniture and other items from classrooms to prevent social distancing? Submit it and justify it. I think that's potentially could be approved. You just have to justify it and explain why you're doing a storage unit. If you simply put, if you simply say $1,200 for a storage unit, that's probably not going to be approved. But if you explain it like you did in the question, that can you purchase more Chromebooks for student usage using the EANS grant? My questions are rolling. Hold on. There it is. Using the EANS grant. If so, will we have to give them up to the ISD? Again, the ISD is not involved in this program. It is the state to the private school. But yes, if you purchase Chromebooks at the end of the program, you will return those back to the state. Testing and monitoring. Can I assume this meaning protocols, taking temperatures and not actual testing? The monitoring piece could include temperature checks. It could include the equipment for, like the electronic thermometers. Testing is testing, but monitoring is broader and could include temperature checks and some other type things. Would you address the types of documentation private schools will need to maintain and or submit? You need anything you're requesting reimbursement for, you need to maintain documentation that you actually received the item and that you paid for it. That's probably the two pieces that we would request if you were randomly selected for a validation of any of those reimbursed items. Anything that you're getting as a service, anything that's in section D3 of the application that we're ordering and providing to you, the vendor is going to be responsible for keeping the documentation on that. So your private school documentation is really around the items that you request reimbursement for. Are these considered federal funds to PNPs? They are considered services to the private school paid with federal funds, but you're not a recipient of federal funds. If you did the PPP loan in the first round in May of 2020, that does not allow you to do EANS. No, first round PPP prior to or before December 27, 2020, you can still participate in EANS. It's only if you take the second round PPP after December 27, 2020, that you can do one or the other. You can't do the second round PPP and EANS. For reimbursement request, is there a multiple bid requirement for purchased goods? No. In this reimbursement program, you don't have to follow federal procurement rules. You just have to provide the documentation if we randomly select you, and that'd be what I've already said, that showing you received it and that you paid for it. But you're not required to follow the federal procurement rules for something you're going to request reimbursement, because the reimbursement is considered a service. So no, you're not following the federal rules. Since the private school are not a subgrantee, they will not have to submit a compliance report at the end of the program, will they? I don't think so, but until USDE puts all the reporting rules out, I can't guarantee that. But you're receiving service, and my vendor should have all the records of the service received. So I really don't think there would be any kind of compliance report that you would have to submit at the private school level. With HVAC installed in a leased building, which you had to lease it in order to comply with CDC social distancing, would the HVAC be covered if it was not removable? The building had a system and the portable equipment could not provide the proper climate control. It's not removable. It is not allowable under EANS. No, it has to be portable and removable without remodeling before it can be considered allowable. Should we enter the same request dollar amounts in D2 and D3? I don't grasp the difference between those two sections. Okay, D1 and D2 are reimbursements. D1, you've already paid for it. D2, you will pay for it and request reimbursement from us in this program. D3 is you're requesting the service. We will procure it, we will order it, and we will then provide it to you. So that's the difference. D1 is prior reimbursement request. D2 is future reimbursement request. D3, you're asking us to do the procurement and do the ordering and just provide the service or material to you. Is there a good comprehensive source for CDC recommendations, past and current? There is a section on CDC's website about their pandemic section about recommendations for education. So that would be the most comprehensive place that I know those are located. Reasonable transportation costs. With taking multiple buses to ensure social distancing to extracurricular events or field trips when one bus would have sufficed pre-pandemic be considered under this option. I think you could put that in there and you could justify that, but make sure you justify it, tying it to social distancing on the bus and showing that it is an additional cost. That's what's going to make it allowable, that it's an additional cost and tie it to the need for social distance on the bus. Regarding windows, our building is metal. 2 rooms do not have windows and would benefit from the circulation. Is there really no way to receive funding to install even one small window per room? No, there's really not, because the window can't be removed without remodeling. Can a higher level of any MERV filters than previously used be included for ventilation improvements? As long as you justify it to air quality and CDC guidelines, yes, that can be allowable. Will most of us be using the D3 section? That's hard to say. It really depends, because you can be reimbursed back to March of 2020. I would expect a lot of you will request reimbursements in D1 and D2. D2 future reimbursement, it allows you to get the items quicker and then be reimbursed for it. But then I don't know. It's hard to say whether you're going to use one more than the other. I think it's going to be spread across all 3 of them. So it's going to be whichever you prefer at the school level. Can I list multiple items in a category with only one total, or do you need to see a cost associated with each item listed within a category? You can list multiple items within each cost category with one total. The way we've set it up are by the actual allowable activities and statute. So you can put multiple items under that one activity and then just enter $1 amount. We don't have any idea how much money we could expect. We don't have a large number of Title I students. I'm afraid we'll put a lot of time into this application and not receive much. You may be right. I can't say. I have no idea how many people are going to apply, how much money will be requested. you don't have very many low-income students, you will have a lower priority score, so you would receive less benefit. But if you apply and submit the information, you will likely receive something. Will it be enough to make it worth the application? That's a decision only you can make. Honestly, this is a simple application in our world, so I would hope it's not that cumbersome on you, because we are allowing you to estimate cost, but that's only a decision that only you can make if it's worth it. Would a 3-year lease for laptop computers be allowed? Computers are for high school students. Not everyone had one available for remote learning. You have to keep the lease within the allowable dates of the program. So the lease would have to end June 30th, 2023. But yeah, a lease on can potentially be allowable. Is there a total dollar limit per school? No, there's not. You can request any amount of service that you need. You may not get the full amount as we do the prioritization, but there's no limit on what you request. Maybe the categories you selected in one part have to match some same categories in part D. I don't understand the question, I'm sorry. We apply for funds to cover a leased building and do not use the full amount due to the purchase of another property. Can those unused funds be put toward the purchase of a building? If you put something toward purchase of a building, the state owns that building. So you would really want to think about that. The amount of funding will not be available until after June 30th. How do you suggest orders be placed for air purifiers, technology, and other durable items that frequently have a long wait time for delivery? You may want to do it as a reimbursement for the items that can be reimbursed, and submit your application earlier to get an approval of the activities. You're not going to know the amount until July. There's just no way around that. So I would say you're going to, in some ways, you're going to have to be ordering what you feel you can cover in the event that this program doesn't cover the full cost of what you're requesting and what you're ordering. And the ones that are allowable to be done under reimbursement, you can go ahead and order and then turn it in for reimbursement to the program after you know how much you're eligible for. Okay, make sure you're understanding correctly. You can submit a request for future reimbursement, but funds will not be dispersed until the expenses are incurred. So you're basically reserving funds for future use. Yes. If you submit D2, future reimbursement for those activities, you would not get the reimbursement until you requested it from the vendor. After such point, you had already paid for that item. So you're requesting a future reimbursement in the application, but you would not actually receive that reimbursement until you've actually purchased the items somewhere between this summer and June 30th of 23. And it says training or professional development for staff. Is that contracted pay for someone we bring into our school? It could be the cost of a trainer. It could be paying for the trainer who would come in and train your staff. That it could be that type of cost. Do we only request funds for low-income students? No, your low-income students carry a higher priority, so they likely generate more for funding as well. We got less than 3 minutes left and 100 questions. I'm not going to get to these in 3 minutes, but how will leasing sites or spaces to ensure social distancing work under D3 since those services are provided by TEA or its vendors? We will have to figure that one out because that's a very good question. We're going to have to explore how that can work if we have to lease the site for you, if there's a way to even do that. Can the application be completed in more than one sitting? Matt, is there a save and come back to it later option in the application?
There is, but what we've cautioned before with this, with LEAs and other systems, is we aren't going to be able to provide you much technical assistance outside of the survey. So you're completing these on different computers with different operating systems, and we provide you the PDF on the first shot. So I strongly encourage you to use the PDF, plan the application, and try to do it in one sitting. The save and continue can create browser and other issues.
And last question, remind us again, equipment purchase such as teacher laptops would have to be returned to the state at some point. Yes, that's true. If we reimburse you for the equipment or you request it from us in D3 of the application, it will eventually come back to the state. All right, that's all the time we have. If your question didn't get answered, you can email it to that EANS@tea.texas.gov email address. If you email it today, it may bounce back. They're setting that email up. We were talking to them this morning, trying to have it set up by noon, but they may not have it set up yet. So if it bounces back, just give it a day or two and then try it again. But you can submit those questions. We will be putting together an FAQ document. We will email out the PowerPoint through the registration. I'm pretty sure I can do that. The PowerPoint will post on the website as a PDF, and the recording will be made available as well in a couple of days. Matt, do you have anything to share?
No, you're correct. Anyone that registered, even if they didn't attend, will get a direct email with all of this information recording. And then after that, everything again will be on the website. And that's also where you should direct anyone that wasn't able to attend or from other colleague private schools. Everything will be posted online and you'll get the best and fastest information there.
All right, that's it for today. If you have questions, email them to us. If you have questions about the actual application, how to fill it out, feel free to contact us. I don't have staff in this program until next week. So if you wait till next week, you'll have a better chance of getting a faster return call because right now it's pretty much just me. But we will be responding to you and getting information out to you as quick as you can. And as Matt said, always go to that one website because that's where we're going to post all the information for this program. So thanks for your time, and we appreciate everything that y'all are doing for students in this crazy time, and we're hoping to make this program work for you and be as easy on you as possible. Thanks.